Hello everyone. On the 13th of May 2021, I went for my first over the board tournament in almost 1 year. Yeah, all the COVID-19 restrictions. And for today, I'll be going through one of the games from that tournament. So over here, I'm taking the black pieces, and the game opens e4, c6, Caro Kann defense, takes, and c4. This is the Panov-Botvinnik attack. Knight to f6, knight to c3, and I choose this g6 line. Idea is to put the bishop here, try and put pressure on this pawn, which is most likely going to become isolated, and also keep the diagonal open for this light square bishop over here. And now my opponent replies with a very strange move, h4. And I felt that this move was quite premature. What are you going to do with h4? You're going to push h5, right? But then I already have this square under control when I play knight to f6. You can't really achieve much. And then if you really insist on going for a very early pawn storm with g4, f4, and then with all your pieces just sleeping on the king side, I don't think this attack isn't really going to work. And that's why I feel that h4 is quite premature over here. Normally in this Panov-Botvinnik games, the strongest move recommended for white is queen to b3. You try to attack this and this pawn at the same time, try to tie down this bishop over here. And usually the game will continue with something like bishop to g7, and then white takes over here, where then white will be left with this isolated double pawns, even though he's a pawn up, and black will be trying to win back the double pawns, while white is trying to hold on to the pawn center. And I played quite a few games in those lines, and usually it is quite exciting. But anyway, queen to b3 wasn't played. Instead, h4 was played. So again, I felt that was premature. I went for the usual plans with bishop to g7, and now he pushes another pawn with c5. Again, I also felt that this wasn't a very good move. First of all, why are you not bringing out your pieces, right? In the opening, you should be moving your pieces. You shouldn't be moving your pawn so much. And also over here, you notice that white has already decided the pawn structure very, very early. I mean, if he keeps the pawn on c4 over here, he still has a choice of either you want to take, or you can play queen to b3 and then try and fight for the pawn center, or maybe later on, if you think that you can play c5, then you play it. But then when you push c5 so early, you're already you're relieving the tension in the center, and you're deciding the nature of the pawn structure. Now black has a very clear plan, because you look at this, we have this weak d4 pawn over here. I'm going to attack it with my bishop. Very soon I'm going to come out with my knight c6 to attack it, and maybe I can even prepare an e5 push later on. So already white is already giving me a very, very clear plan to continue from here. So again, c5, I felt it wasn't very good. And I continued as per normal, knight to c6 with the usual plan. You see, I'm already planning attack on the d4 pawn. a3 is pushing yet another pawn. You see all the pieces are still asleep on the first rank. And over here, it took quite some time for me to decide on my next move. In this kind of positions, one very common plan for white is to play things like bishop to f4, taking over the c7 square, and then after that, there's this very nasty trade of knight to b5 and then knight to c7. And if black is not careful, it can be quite bad for him. Naturally, you would think that I should push a6, try and stop it, but a6 itself also, it creates problems of its own. The most obvious one would be that you see now there's this hole on b6 that white can now exploit, right? And this rook isn't looking so good, right? If let's say there's a bishop at f4, you control the square, then where is he going to go? You have to go to a7, nowhere else. So you need to be very careful before you play this kind of pawn moves. Then in that case, other than a6, what else can I consider, right? I mean, one of the moves I looked at was queen to c7, right? The idea is that you stop the bishop from coming to f4, but again that fails to knight to b5, and then after that your queen has to retreat. So let's say queen to c7, knight to b5, then where are you going to go, man? Right? If you go queen a5 check, you're not really making any threats against this knight, right? It's protected, and then after something like bishop to d2, then yeah, where's your queen going to go? He has to go back, and you basically just wasted a lot of tempo. You allow white to catch up in development. So no, queen c6, not so good. But eventually I settled on the move a6 anyway, and you see I did give white the option of knight to a5, knight to b3, knight to a4, knight to b6. But I realized that actually this threat is not as strong as it looks, because I have a very nice series of moves that you will see later on to actually regain the initiative if white goes for this plan. So anyway, let's continue on. Bishop to f4. So you see he's taking over the c7 square. I cannot place queen to c7 now. But fortunately, he cannot play knight to b5 as well. So that's one threat that I no longer have to worry about. Bishop to f5, very standard. And now knight to a4. So yes, white is indeed trying to play for this b6 square. But now here's the thing. I did see that white would try to play this, and as mentioned earlier, I saw that I had a very nice series of moves to try and counter this, which begins with queen to a5 check. And what's the idea behind this move? You see that actually white only has a few options over here, right? Because he has already pushed the c5 pawn so far, he no longer has the c3 to close this diagonal. So he has to either like block with the bishop or retreat the knight. So if let's say you retreat the knight, right, then you're basically wasting a move here. Then white is just admitting that his plan of putting the knight on b6 is failed, right? On the other hand, if you and on the other hand, there's another move, something like b5, which if you think about it, it really just weakens the queen side a lot, because after, let's say, queen to d8, now again I have pressure on here, and I have the pressure on this diagonal over here if it becomes open. So b5 also wasn't very good. And the last option for here, which is what white played, is bishop to d2. And when I saw this move, well, I was very happy, because now I play queen to c7, and you realize that when the bishop moved back to d2, he had no choice but to give up this c7 square, and that is why I went back to occupy it. So queen to c7, already I had a small victory here. I took over the c7 square from the dark square bishop, and now this bishop is looking a bit stupid. Like, where's it gonna go, man? There's not a lot of good squares for it. So I'm happy over here. Knight to b6, of course, that came in. I wasn't very scared of it because I had rook to d8, supporting his pawn if he ever gets to push one day. And yeah, what is white to do here, right? He has put the knight on b6, then what else does he have to do? And over here, white makes a very bad mistake by pushing f4. Again, another unnecessary pawn push. And also over here, you notice that it just drops the d4 pawn over here, which I've been talking about a lot just now. So actually, after this blunder, white's game pretty much just fell apart with knight takes d4. And no, I mean, the threat is knight to c, the knight fork. So I think this is pretty much forced. And after castling, you notice that white is pretty much lost here, because look at all these light square weaknesses over here, right? This knight can go places as well. His pawn is weak, and then sooner or later I'm going to do things like rook e1 and then push e5, and then I blow open a position. You see white's king is still in the center, and you see all his pieces are still, he hasn't even developed them. All he has been doing all this while is pushing pawns, right? So yeah, his position pretty much just fell apart over here after castling, and then I think a few moves later after this, he resigned over here. I mean, you just take a look at this position, you know that white is just completely lost, right? But now the point I want to make today is that even if white hadn't played this f4 blunder, right, you notice that actually in this position it's really quite hard for him to try and think of a good plan. And the main reason is because black already has been given so much time to develop all his pieces, right? I mean, all he needs to do is just castle later on, and then and then he has completed his development. So let's say knight to f3 protecting this pawn, and then castles, and white and black is ready to continue with his plans. On the other hand, you look at white, right? He still needs to catch up in development. Where's his light square bishop going to go, right? And then he needs to castle. And I think whatever that white is planning, black is going to get his attack in first. I mean, black has many ways to continue the game, right? You have this weak squares over here. You have the rook e8 and then e5 plan that I talked about earlier. No, Nima, it's not a new haircut, it's my virtual background. I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah, but anyway, there's the rook e8 and then e5 plan, and then if it takes, then this is going to become a pass pawn, which is very dangerous for white. So really, black has a lot to do in this game because he's so much better developed as compared to white. And on the other hand, you look at from white's perspective, it's quite hard to think of a plan for him, right? Already I talk about where I'm going to put this bishop. And what else? How is white going to attack? Maybe, he has this knight to b6 here. He can consider things like pushing the pawn and then, maybe play queen to or rook on the c file or something. But the problem is that it's not so effective anymore because the moment you play c5, you close up this queen side. How are you going to get open files anymore, right? If you don't have open files, it's going to be very hard for white to continue pushing on the queen side. So again, that's why c5 was a very premature decision. You just close out the queen side, and yeah, it makes it very hard for white to find a plan later on during the game, right? So yes, that's it for today. And really the point I wanted to bring about here is that you notice how it became so difficult for white to play in this game because he's wasted too much time pushing these pawns, h4, c5. I might even say that a3 was a bit questionable as well. Instead of focusing on the development of his pieces like this light square bishop, he should have developed this knight much earlier on instead of like wasting time pushing the pawns and then going for this weird knight maneuver over here. And because of that, it became very hard for white to play in this game. And even though the f4 pretty much won me this game, but I would say that even if white had not made the mistake and he went for this, it would have been it is still much harder for him to play. Yeah, black is just much better developed here. He is going to start his attack first, and yeah, basically black is better. Yep. What about bishop c3? What is back but can hold? Yeah, I think I agree, Nima. I think bishop to c3 definitely is playable, and then you open this, you can open the file, bishop to d3, try and hope to trade off some pieces. But I think the idea here is that I think white really can only hope for like passive defense and try and hold a position. He really doesn't have much hope for attacking. If anything, black is the one that's in the driver's seat. Yep. Right, so thank you so much for today, and see you all in the next live stream.